Hello, everyone. Just gonna give a couple minutes for others to join us and we'll get started soon. Okay, well, maybe we should just jump in and hopefully others will join as time goes on. Welcome to our Community College STEM Network webinar. My name is Michelle Vanoy, and I'm Director of the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers and PI of the CCSN. Our group is a group of researchers and practitioners working to generate and share research on community college STEM pathways. We have an ongoing webinar series that this is part of. We also have a variety of research projects and partnerships that are focused on understanding how academically talented low-income students navigate pathways in STEM fields within community colleges. So just so everyone knows, we're recording the webinar and it'll be shared with everyone to watch later. We're asking for folks to keep cameras off for the duration of the webinar, but we encourage and highly encourage you to ask any questions or provide comments throughout the presentation, through chat, or if you want to raise your hand or whatever, we are happy to answer questions throughout the presentation. So I just want to take a moment to introduce our presenters today. We're excited to have key members of our CCSN team, Dr. Maria Espino, who's a researcher with Rutgers here at the ERC, and Dr. Elizabeth Meza, who's a researcher at the University of Washington. And we're really excited to hear about the work that they've both been doing on a systematic literature review of STEM programs at community colleges. And I feel like we've learned so much about the program features as well as how community college students navigate decision-making around STEM careers through this work. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Meza and Dr. Espino to share the work that they've been doing on this project.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this project. I'm Elizabeth Meza. I'm a co-PI on the CCSN. And along with Dr. Espino, and I have to say Dr. Espino really did lead this work, we've been working on a systematic literature review of community college STEM programs and students. So the research problem that we're addressing with this webinar is that we do think that there's a gap in research and knowledge about one of the largest investments in the quest for broadening STEM pathways, and that's the NSF STEM program. As you all, I'm sure, are aware, STEM promotes the participation and success of low-income, academically talented STEM students at community colleges through scholarships supplemented by institutional supports, and aims to improve student outcomes. So what we did is a systematic literature review of students in STEM programs. And I'll just move on to the next slide. So our research questions were about what do we know about STEM programs and programming in community colleges, looking at peer-reviewed published research. What can we say about notable themes in research related to STEM programs in community colleges? And then we tried to look at the different interventions that exist and how can we say that those interventions influence student outcomes. So I'm going to turn it over to Maria now, who's going to lead you a little bit through the methodology of how we went about answering these questions.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, overall, as we mentioned, this is a systematic literature review. So we really wanted to focus primarily at several databases. On the next slide, you'll see that the databases we looked into were Compendex, EBSCOhost, PsycInfo, the AESEE peer repository, which is obviously something super important when we think about STEM and things like that. And then we looked at community college journals because this work, we're hoping that it comes into the community college spaces in the academic sphere and being able to look at the work that is coming up, especially particularly looking at the community college spaces. If we go into the next slide, one more. And when we were looking at the inclusion criteria, we were particularly looking at 10 years worth of work. So we were looking at anything published between 2013 and 2023. We looked at that time period most importantly because that is a lot of the time that we saw STEMs coming to community colleges. You know, we currently experience a global pandemic. So we really wanted to see what is the research that's being told during that period where we've had significant life events in higher education and in the community colleges. So we wanted to be able to encapsulate all of those experiences in that 10-year period. We also looked at peer review and being able to be a referred journal or article or conference proceedings. So we looked at published articles, book chapters, and or conference proceedings. Because again, the ASEE repository is such an important aspect in STEM education and in Pathways work, we wanted to make sure we brought those into the conversation. We wanted the information to be full text available and written in English. And as we know, when we're talking about this information being from an STEM program, we wanted to make sure that the programs or the research that we got were awardees or awarded through an STEM program in a community college or including a community college, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in the findings. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Mesa.
So just to give you a little bit of a visual of what this looked like, we ended up through searching the record through searching all the databases that Maria went through. We ended up with 368 records, and then we screened some of those out. Some of them were duplicates, or maybe they weren't peer reviewed, or maybe they were prior to 2013, even though we had that in as a search field, something like that. So that brought us down to 144. Out of those 144, we then determined that a number of those were also excluded because they weren't full text. And then we were down to 76, and we excluded some more because they either weren't really about community colleges, even though maybe that was like a term that was included in the article somewhere, but it wasn't really about community colleges. Or because they were about a different NSF program, but not STEM. So we ended up with 36 studies that we were able to include in the review that met all the criteria that Maria went through. So if we could look at the next slide. So we then looked at these 36 articles across 6 dimensions. And we looked at where were they published, what was the research setting, what's the methodological approach, if they had a theoretical framework, what was that, what were any co and extracurricular interventions or supports that the STEM involved. And then we tried to take a broad look at what were any themes that emerged across the 36 articles. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the publication outlets and what our findings were there. So you'll see that the vast majority of the publication outlet results were coming from an ASEE conference. And then there was a small number at some other conference, a small number in the Community College Journal of Research and Practice, and a small number that were published in another journal. But really that ASEE conference dominates any information that we found about STEMs in community colleges. And if we go on to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about the research setting. So We did find that the majority of the research was taking place in a community college, but that also a large percentage, that big blue chunk over there, was taking place at a four-year college or university. So the four-year college or university was reporting on how they were working with community college students, how they recruited community college students, what they did for community college transfer students once they reached the university, something like that. The other articles that you see the smaller chunks of color in there were either at a single community college or maybe a group of community colleges along with a four-year university. But most of those, the setting of the research was really the community college. So if we move on, I'm going to let Maria talk a little bit about the methodological approaches that we found in these 36 articles that we reviewed. So go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, and as you've noticed a little bit about the previous two, we really do see a lot of the work in the ASWE repository. And then we do see that there's a lot of work that's done at the four-year institutions that works with the community college or is really centering the community college experiences, but it's mostly housed in the four-year. So I think that is extremely interesting when looking at the methodological approaches. 33% of the 36 were actually reports by grant PIs or type of reporting that they provide for dissemination purposes. 22% focus of it on a quantitative approach to the work, either looking at surveys, in particular looking at data that they collected about their particular program. 16%, a little bit over 16% focused on qualitative, which was interviews or focus groups, and then 13% focused on mixed methods. So a little bit of both understanding their data, but also being able to talk about it through interviews or focus groups. There was a category that we ended up doing as not categorized because they didn't really talk about their methodology approach, or they didn't really say that it was part of a report or something that they're having dissemination purposes wise. But we did find it important to make sure that we talk about there is 11% that they didn't really have some of those areas, but still found it important to be able to publish or talk about it at a conference or have a conference proceeding, that it was important to get their voices out there for their particular STEM program. I will go to the next slide. This one is one of my favorites, and Elizabeth and our team really knows that. It's really fascinating to me. We see the methodological approaches. We really see the settings in which this work was being done, but how is this work coming into fruition? As Dr. Mesa has mentioned earlier, there is some of our 36 articles that did not have theoretical frameworks, but the ones that did, these were the list of theoretical frameworks that came up. So we saw communities of practice, we saw departure theory, we saw things like self-efficacy and sense of community, cognitive, social cognitive theory. So for the ones that did have these different theoretical frameworks, it is important to see how they're interacting with these frameworks in the community college setting, or how these programs are having these different things. So this is really fascinating for me to see what frameworks are being instituted or used to understand the different community college STEM programs. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the different co and extracurricular interventions. As you know, STEM programs do have some component of working with students or having some type of development that is a part of the overall NSF STEM. So we were happy to see that some of the articles of the 36 articles talked a little bit about faculty development programs or curriculum development, looking at faculty research and what that does that look like at a community college, faculty mentorship, advising, and then of course the peer-to-peer interventions, which are like peer tutoring, peer mentoring, student writing workshops, things like that that really help solidify or show how their NSF STEM is solidified at their institutions. And of course, the bridge programs and different student cohorts. So these are some of the overarching interventions that really stood out and that they talked about in these 36 articles. If we go into the next slide, this one particularly is a word cloud. As Elizabeth talked about a little bit when we talked about the overarching findings, we really wanted to see what are these different institutions talking about? What are they doing? So we used a lot of their keywords. We used parts of their titles and abstracts to really understand what are they telling us? So we put this into a word cloud area, and the most prominent word that came out was transfer and program. Students, academic support, as you can see in these different words that are emerging. Obviously, the ones that are bigger are the ones that that word was used more. So for us, this was like, okay, so these are the themes that are coming up that they're talking about a lot in this community college STEM program, systematic literature review. So what does this tell us a little bit further? Particularly on the next slide, we talk about the importance of intentional programming support, particularly leading us to STEM identity development or a STEM or sense of belonging or overarching feeling of individuals in STEM. So that's one of the really bigger overarching themes. The next one is really thinking about how the NSF STEM is set up for students. So what exactly does this scholarship or this program provide students? What is valuable? What has allowed them to be able to work less hours or be able to focus on their academics, whether it's being able to not have to do an extra job or working full time, especially when focusing on that financial hardship, to be able to provide students the ability to be retained, but also to be able to be to academically perform to the standards that they would like to, or what they consider success. The third theme we looked at in particular is looking at STEM pathways as ways that can be difficult, that really need expertise or that support, as we saw, and like the big word was transfer. So having that extra guidance and expertise to be able to support the students as they're navigating this STEM and this overall program and expertise in STEM. And lastly, one of the last themes that we really wanted to focus on was really understanding how these different intersecting factors of students that come into STEMs influence their STEM decision-making in the community college space for career, post-community college experiences such as transfer or going straight to the workforce. Like, what does this look like for students as a whole as they're navigating this NSF program and this scholarship program, and what does that actually lead them, or what is the outcome for that as they navigate their intersecting identities, their intersecting factors that really affect the way that they make decisions as they're navigating their STEM and their STEM trajectories. And then I will hand it back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Maria. So as you can see, those 4 themes really emerged across the 36 articles, but taken together with our other 5 dimensions that we looked at, what we really came away with was an understanding that there is a need to expand research that focuses on NSF programs in community colleges, how they're implemented, and how this unique funding opportunity operates and supports students in community colleges. As you saw through some of our slides, we found that there was a bit of a gap in the literature in terms of describing what these were in community colleges and describing who the students were, describing student outcomes. So that's something that we really want to focus on in this community college STEM network, is in working to fill that gap and to create some more research to practice partnerships that would allow us to tell the stories of these community college students. So I think the next slide just kind of highlights that a little bit further. So we want to explore research opportunities solely at community colleges. I think another implication is to increase detailed and robust research about STEM programs in those settings. So I'm really thrilled that you all joined us all today. I have some discussion questions that I'd love to get everybody involved in, but please, if you had any questions as you were watching the presentation, or you want to know a little bit more, you want us to describe something a little bit further, or talk about our methodology, or whatever it is, please put your questions in the chat. We'd be really happy to answer them. Maria and I spent, I guess probably the better part of a year working on this Syslet. So we really want to engage with you on what you're thinking as you listen to the presentation. Go ahead and put them in there, but otherwise I'm going to raise some discussion questions. And if everybody, I think at this point maybe does want to, I know Michelle does want to turn their videos on or their audio on if you'd like, that would be great too. So as we are thinking about this, and I guess I'll pose this question to Maria and maybe to Michelle. as you're thinking about this, what specific aspects of the NSF STEM program require further research to better understand their impact on community college students? And are there particular areas where current research is lacking? I think Maria has some thoughts. So Maria, let me turn it over to you, and then anybody else, please jump in and share your own thoughts on this question.
Yeah, obviously I love this work. So for me, as someone who I really love, I focus a lot of my background work in community college settings and overall pathways and success of students. So for me, I'm just very curious to see with the new development of like AI and the cybersecurity and things like that that are super critical to STEMs and the community college setting because we see these types of majors, IT and things like that in community college settings. So I'm very curious to see what the expansion of that will look like on a policy level for like STEM stuff. Funding obviously is a big one with that type of particular with NSF, like if it's going to stay the same or is it going to expand a little bit more. But when it comes to like the research itself, I'm just really curious to see more and want to hear more of like community colleges themselves, like running their research and being able to have that capacity. And I know with that being said, I also know the limitations of community college practitioners and the workload that takes. But I'm also really hopeful and insightful in understanding like how community colleges perceive their development of their if they get NSF STEM grants and the development of themselves like in their institution basis because we saw that the research like a lot of them are 4 years that are doing this work. So I'm curious to see what the lens would look like if it was a community college running the research themselves and how they go about it themselves to have us understand what exactly is going on. In their particular community college or in a community college in a group of community colleges and doing cross case analysis that way. So that's kind of something that I think is super fascinating and I'm hoping that we get to see a little bit more of.
If nobody else has anything to say about that, I'll say one thing. I think we've been talking a lot in our group about the research to practice kind of unfortunate, maybe not disconnect, but just that we know that there's a lot of knowledge out there in community colleges. And other than this ASE conference, it really doesn't seem to be being, kind of disseminated to a larger audience. So that's one thing that I would just like to see, just more research and more dissemination, but also then more connections to how that theory slide that that Maria showed us, how are those theories being applied in community colleges and how are they working with the intervention? So if I'm going to use, person and environment, and that's going to be my theoretical. So then what interventions do I choose and how do I implement that to go about working with that theory and choosing my interventions and thinking about the way that I work with students based on that particular theory. And I think there are a number of good STEM grants out there right now that are doing that really well, and it'd be great to get some more of those in the spotlight. Oh, okay. Yes, okay. Hurdles with IRB and limits on institutional research that hinder our ability to do research. Oh, that's too bad. I feel really sad when I hear this because IRBs and your ability to do research on your own program, actually, if you're just doing research on your own program for the use of your own program, that should not even have to go through an IRB. There's a lot of misconceptions out there in community colleges about what requires an IRB and what doesn't. People don't want to get, run afoul of those requirements. But and I'm happy to talk to anyone at your institution. If you're just doing research and talking to students about your own program and how you can improve your own program, that's actually not considered research and should not have to go through an IRB process. If you do want to publish your results at something like the ASCE conference, or and then it should go through an IRB process. But the IRB processes are federally regulated, and so if your community college doesn't have a federally regulated IRB, please contact someone at your local college, university, or even your state and ask them what their IRB process is, because I think sometimes community colleges try and set up their own IRB processes that are not necessarily in compliance with the federal requirements. And there's a website called Citi, CITI, that you can go to and look for some more about this. But I'd also be happy, please, I'll put on my email address in a minute, and I'm happy to kind of give you some more information about that, because I've had this problem in my work as well, where I want to go interview community college students, and I run into issues with the community college IRBs. So let me know. David, I'm happy to see what I can do to, I mean, I'm not sure it will work because they don't seem to believe me sometimes either, but I could give you some information anyway. Let's see. And then we've got one from Regis. Yeah, I mean, yes. I do think that NSF is aware of this issue. I know David Brown is maybe on this call, and I think he has some thoughts on this as well. So maybe he could jump on. So they used to have a it's my understanding, and I'm not an expert in this, that there used to be a requirement to do research within your program, and I think that requirement has gone away. Okay, hold on, let me read the second part of the question. Yeah. So, if you would like to do some research on your community college, but you don't feel like you have the funding to do that, that's something that you can write into your NSF proposal, a little bit of a line item for doing some research within your within your project. And also, we're looking for partners for research partnerships within our own within the CCSN. And again, I'll put up my email address in just a moment. If you're interested in partnering with us to do some research, I'd be happy to talk with you about what that would look like on our end, and see if we could craft something to support any research that you would want to do. Yeah, that does make sense. If there was just a little bit more guidance about how to go about this, I think just in general, there needs to be more guidance about how to go about research within community college settings.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to also, part of the stuff that we do through the CCSN is do our proposal workshops, writing workshops that I think Dave is one of, Dr. Brown is one of the ones that leads that. So I think that's awesome that Dave for dropping in some links in there in the chat that can be helpful with how to navigate that space or kind of ideate potentially what to do to be able to hit what you need for the program managers, but also be able to understand or be able to find ways to have extra line items or be able to have that extra support in the way that you're writing potential grants to move forward. So that's just another resource or toolkit to be able to put under your belt if that's something you are interested in. Dave is an amazing resource for that, and obviously the CCSN.
Oh, shush.
Gotta give your flowers when they're due.
Yeah,
It's really
well,
fascinating.
let me say a few words to sort of knit together what Elizabeth and Maria have just been saying, and to address what Regis is asking. So yeah, it's true. Several years ago, the STEM program morphed, and it's done that many times over my history with it. It undergoes small changes, and sometimes there are tectonic shifts. But they enveloped any kind of knowledge generation into what's now considered robust project evaluation. So about 5 years ago, the requirement was still in effect that you had to have, as one of the lead project management team individuals, an educational or social science or ed psych, whatever, somebody who has the bandwidth to do research on people. And so that was mandated that you had to have both an evaluator and a researcher of some kind. But then that really stretched the budget in a big way. That whole 40% thing, you want to talk about how tough it is now. Back then, when you had to pay 2 people to do all that stuff and a PI and, you know, very little, and the budgets were even smaller then. So that money got even tighter. So they wrapped it all under the label of robust project evaluation to generate knowledge. Now the 40-60 split is nothing, there's nothing NSF can do about that. That's congressionally mandated. That's in the legislation that led to the STEM program. And so it is a very tight needle to thread, and I get that. And so you can certainly request those funds, but it becomes a matter of, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul sort of situation. It's a zero-sum game. And so you have to be very judicious in how you structure a budget and what you put on what line item. And yes, you can write your congressperson about that, Regis. Go for it. Just don't tell them I said that. No, it's okay. So anyway, it is a tough thing, and we, you know, we do discuss that in our proposal preparation workshops, and it is no small feat to come up with a really comprehensive budget that serves all the purposes that one would hope to get out of an STEM grant. It helps now that the track ones are $1 million, so that does help a bit with some of those challenges, but it's still challenging nonetheless, particularly depending on the institutional indirect rate, and indirect cost recoveries can take a big bite out of those 40%. So it is really a multi-variable problem to solve.
Well, thank you, Dave. I knew you were gonna have so much insight, so yeah, that is super helpful, even for me to understand, because obviously I do the work on this on a more policy problematic area, not necessarily on like the larger thing. So thank you so much for all that insight. That's super fascinating for me to conceptualize as well as I'm thinking about this stuff.
Trey, can you go back to the slide that was the themes? Thank you. I mean, the themes are one thing to think about, but just in general, were any of our findings surprising to you, or were you you know, kind of like, oh, well, I wish I could learn more, I wonder why that is. I'm just wondering if anybody had anything that they thought stood out. No? Okay.
Well, I'm going to jump in because,
Yeah.
you know, oh, go ahead. If somebody else that's not one of us has something to ask, go for it, please.
I was just going to say, with the work that we've done so far, and I am a PI and faculty member at a community college, so this is definitely the zone that I'm living in, is those really resonate with exactly what we've been seeing. And I think the big thing that sometimes people don't think about with the financial is it isn't that community college costs that much, it's that they're trying to save money for the next 2 years. So even if I can give them basically a full ride, they're still going to work, because how else are they going to start having any money at all for their junior year? And so that's something I think people don't always think about. It's not the moment, it's those who are planning ahead.
I think that's fascinating. Oh no, sorry, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say our colleague, Will Tyson, who is also involved in this grant from University of South Florida, did a paper at ASEE where he specifically talked to students about how the STEM scholarship affects them financially. And yeah, I mean, and I've done a number of interviews with students at a college that I'm working with, and the students are, you know, it's not, I think, you know, for sort of white middle class people, I said this in an earlier meeting, we conceptualize a scholarship as something to pay for school. And that's the perspective that I was coming from. But the students are often conceptualizing the scholarship as like, okay, this is a way to pay a little bit of rent, and I can buy some dog food, and I can fix my car, and I can get my pay for my parking. And there's a lot of different, they're not just using it for their academic tuition, they're using it for multiple different ways, and they're trying to save, as you said, for the next step as well. So it's really fascinating to talk to them about all the different ways in which they have so much to juggle and so many multiple needs that need to be met. And how the scholarship just takes a little bit of stress away from them. There's some new research on stress reduction coming out that's kind of interesting to read as well. How just a little bit of the stress reduction that the scholarship can take away can really just help get them to that next step of transfer.
Yeah, let me toss a couple of things in here, if I may, please. One is a follow-up comment to what you just said, Elizabeth, and one is to go back to a question you asked earlier. What you described in the students' experience of how they're using those STEM scholarship funds is exactly what the program intends, right? When it's determined what their unmet financial need is, right? The formula for calculating that is the cost of attendance minus nowadays it's called the student aid index, used to be called the expected family contribution, but the stuff that comes out of FAFSA, if it ever comes out of FAFSA, but that's a whole other can of worms. But this difference between the cost of attendance and institutions determine that cost of attendance, and that includes transportation and housing and books and food and childcare, whatever it might be that an individual has to pay to be a college student. What does life demand in terms of financial obligations that must be met in order to be a STEM major at a college? And so that's, what you're hearing from those students would certainly resonate with the peeps at NSF or in Congress for that matter, whose intentions are to fill those gaps in their bank accounts to pay all those different obligations they have. The question you asked earlier in terms of gaps in research, and one thing, so I mentioned before the shifts in the program solicitation. When I say program solicitation, NSF has its own special lexicon. For those who aren't used to that term, it's another term that most of the world uses for RFP or RFA. It's the document that guides the mission of the program described and how to prepare a proposal and that sorts of things. So when I talk about the program solicitation, that's just NSF's language for an RFP. But it undergoes changes pretty regularly. I can remember times when it's changed more than once in the same year. But one of the bigger changes that I think was influenced by community colleges and the students that they serve was a few years ago when they eliminated the requirement that an STEM scholar must be a full-time student. And now, as long as they're half-time or more, they can be eligible. And one of the things that I've been hoping to see over these years since that change in the eligibility came along was, how has it influenced those part-time students? How many of them have been able to transition from 6 units to 8 units and 8 units to 10 units and 10 to 15 full-time, whatever it might be? I would love to see some research done on the impacts of these scholarships on, because one of the overarching goals, the overarching goal is to get more STEM degrees out of U.S. colleges and universities. That's Congress's mission there. But one of the ways to approach that is to shorten time to degree. And so one of the facets of research that I have not seen anybody do yet, and I don't know everything that's being done, but one of the things I think would be really enlightening and exciting would be to see what impacts that's having on transitioning folks to taking increased loads and getting to those degrees or transfer in the case of many community college students in a more timely manner.
And you actually hit exactly what I was going to say earlier. For me, yes, these themes, and I agree with David and Travis that have mentioned it in the chat as well. For me, one of the parts is like, yes, we talk about providing pathways to STEM students, but how long are these pathways taking? Are they part-time students? Are they full-time students? What exactly does that look like in the community college setting? Obviously, one of the big things is transfer. Transfer is huge in this conversation with the findings that we found in the systematic literature review. But one of the things that I'm really curious about is seeing, yes, these students are the goal is to transfer. The goal is to have these students prepared to transfer or get transferred. But how long is that taking? How are these funds being used during that time period? Are they going full time? Are they going part time? What exactly is happening in that student's lived experience, and particularly looking at financial hardship that is happening during this time? And I did want to read a couple comments in the chat that I feel that are important to highlight. David had mentioned another thing we would like is how to capture students' progress after they transfer and graduate, but it's very difficult to track. So that post-graduation, the post-transfer aspect of things. Travis had mentioned, I'm sad to hear, but not surprised that financial hardship still exists despite the scholarship supporting the students. And then another comment was from David. Another issue is we have encountered is that summer internships/stipends can be counted against their fall financial aid. Is there a way to separate this? Which I think is super fascinating, but on my understanding, I don't know if there is a way to separate it because it does depend on the summertime, I think, if I remember correctly, to be able to do that. Okay. No, our associate degree to transfers are deceptive. The goal is 2 years, about 60 units degree, but many of them in STEMs can include prereqs to stay under 60 units. Yep. So how do we navigate that? Or even what was the developmental education courses to get to the prereq level? That's a whole nother conversation that I think is super important to talk about because we think about math and English and where students come in at that level, which is obviously a small tangent, but still really relative to people pursuing STEM degrees at community colleges. Yeah, can we go back to our discussion questions? I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay. Oh, interesting. AB 1705 in California are trying to address that, but we are not finding a lot of success with students skipping the developmental courses. Yeah. Which has been also, I think, a huge part that we need to address in developmental math and things like that in the work that we're doing when it comes to STEM education and preparing students at the post-secondary education sphere as a whole, which is an issue in both community college and 4 years, honestly, because when you enroll in a certain STEM major, you might not even be at the basic, in quotes, algebra or whatever they want for the requirements to take.
I think I'm seeing a lot of good research ideas here. So again, just to repeat and reiterate what was already said here, Elizabeth and Maria, and they've mentioned, we do, as part of our project, our network, have opportunities coming, hopefully starting in the new year in 2025 to partner with folks like you all. So definitely reach out if any of these things are sparking ideas about things you want to learn more about at your college. We'd love to learn with you.
Kind of related to what we're just talking about with the math, I think one of the things that's interesting is when you see four-year programs talk about cohorts, is they assume that they're kind of on the same path. And I'm going to have a cohort that has somebody in college algebra and somebody in Calc 3. So they're not necessarily engaging in the way that they think of cohorts engaging. My students can be on very different tracks, but yet still, we're still going to get together for our socials or study halls, but they're not cohorted in that same manner.
Mm. No, thank you for that insight. I think that's super valuable too.
One thing that we found in the themes is really that sense of belonging and STEM identity development were the things that students really mentioned as being super important in their STEM programs, and faculty mentioned too. So I do think that, even if they're on in different cohorts, just having that group of friends that they know they're all in STEM and they're together in this journey and can share resources and talk about, well, take this calc professor, don't take that one, and study together potentially if they are in the same classes. That turns out to be something that students in interviews say is really important to them, the identity development and the sense of belonging. So those are two of the theories that we're really interested in looking at and how they operate within community colleges, because as you say, a lot of the research has been done in 4 years where the cohort might be a much more defined space. So it's, quite a bit easier maybe to create a sense of belonging in that kind of a cohort than it is in community colleges. But even just small touch points, it seems like are important for community college, creating that sense of belonging.
Yeah, I think on the flip side, we have the benefit that they can tutor each other more
Yeah.
because they are at different stages.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that second question already when thinking about ways that we think about how STEM influences student outcomes. Is there any other ways that we should navigate and or think about student outcomes when we're looking at the programmatic aspect of STEMs? They either came up through the systematic literature review or that you all feel in your experiences either knowing about STEMs, having an STEM, or wanting to get into an STEM. Wanting to get an STEM.
I guess if nobody wants to talk about that one, I have a question for Travis, who just wrote, if you're still here, Travis, I'm not sure, but so I'm just wondering, you're saying you're not finding a lot of success in the developmental courses. Is it because, so I wrote my dissertation on developmental math. Is it because the students come into the first level, college level math class unprepared if they skip the developmental courses, or is there some other, what is it that is the not finding the success?
Yeah, so AB 1705, for those that don't know, it allows students to skip all developmental English and math classes and go right into college level math and English. I'm also on our vice president of our academic senate, and just at our last meeting, a number of our English and math faculty came in asking us to kind of work with our administration to find kind of alternative pathways, because they're finding that their retention in a lot of their lower level, their college level but lowest level math and English classes is dropping dramatically, and they're finding it is because all of these students are skipping the developmental math and English. They're going straight into these classes. They're not prepared. They're seeing that they're not prepared, and they're just dropping out of classes very, very quickly, which is causing class cancellation. So that's a problem for our faculty, but it's even more so like these students are then dropping out of college altogether, potentially, not just these specific math and English classes, but maybe our entire school completely. So we've been kind of floundering with this for a while, and we've been trying to prepare for this law for 2 or 3 or 4 years now, and still we're not finding it very easy, and our students are not finding it very easy. But again, a lot of that drive is that we want to push students out in 2 years, and if they're taking 3 years of developmental math and English, that's going to be a problem. And so how to rectify this was we'll just skip all of that, and it's what the answer to this question is. I don't claim to know, but we're not having a lot of success with our students skipping because they're just dropping out altogether.
Are you finding that some students in the STEM programs as well should be are are having this issue, or is it more the students who are just, like kind of I call it Math 107.
Yeah.
That's what it was called at, at the college I used to work at, right?
I think it's more, yeah, I think it's more our students, generally speaking. I think our STEM specific students are a little bit less affected, but I not entirely unaffected.
Right.
But our STEM students are more willing to
They're maybe better prepared
offer
from the
those additional
outset.
supports, and yeah, and they've maybe taken some AP classes before in the past, so they're a little bit more ready for the rigors of college. So our STEM students, I think, are a little bit more secure from the effects of that law, but our students just in general are dramatically affected.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I didn't know about that law in California, so that's interesting to learn about. I think we're just about, how are we doing on time? We have a little bit more time if anybody wants to bring up anything else that you thought of as you were watching our presentation, or just general STEM kinds of reflections.
Yeah, and David also mentioned in the chat that they have a similar experience, that the Senate convinced admin to offer developmental classes again, but on a smaller scale. So that's interesting.
Interesting, yeah. David, what school are you at? Are you at a community college? If you're there.
He's my former colleague
Oh.
in my past life.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining us. Southwestern Community College. Okay, great.
And he's also a Scarlet Knight too, Michelle, just so you know. He's an alumnus of Rutgers University.
That's exciting. All kinds of good connections.
Cook College.
Yeah.
Great. Trey, can you go to the next slide, and I'll just talk really briefly about the UW Husky alumni. Oh, good job. Me too. And I'm a Badger as well, so me and Maria have that connection. Okay, so I did want to just mention briefly our research partnerships that have been brought up a couple of different times here. So in this, we're currently in year 2 of our NSF grant, but in year 3, we're looking for some community colleges, and moving forward from there all the way through year 5, we're looking for some community colleges that might want to partner with us to do some research in the kinds of areas that we've been discussing. And it could be something as simple as just like running a methodology by us, or getting some help with an IRB submission, or maybe kind of talking about what we know about some of the theories, and giving you some resources in that regard. Or it could be as involved as like really partnering to co-create a research project from the outset. So we're kind of open to any different level of engagement that you might be interested in these research partnerships. And below, you'll see my email there. So I'm kind of starting to actively recruit potential projects that might work. And we'd want to get started sometime in January. So if you have any colleagues who, just reached out for a resource, or like I said, kind of more of a long-term thing, that'd be great. I'd love to speak with you, and hopefully, we can figure out a way to work together. I am a former community college faculty member and administrator, so I know a little bit about how community colleges operate, and all of the scrutiny and just time suck that something like this might take. So I appreciate your willingness to engage. Is there a publication of your systematic literature review? So we are under review right now at a journal, but we have so hopefully soon. There will be one. We do have a conference paper from the ASEE. We went and presented our work there and submitted a conference paper to them. So you can find it in their conference repository. Maria might have it handy. But what we'll do is, since we have all of your email addresses and contact information, if it is published, we can send it out at that point. And even if it's not published, we'll end up eventually putting it on our website, you know, at some point as well. Does it have the 36 papers? Oh, the paper.
No, we're finally, as of right now, it doesn't, but we are trying to create a more condensed, clean version of where all the 36 pages are. So we're hoping to use that as a toolkit to eventually disseminate. We just have to clean it up first.
Yeah. So we'll get it there. But thank you for your interest. I hope you do get a chance to read it.
Yeah, I'm also in the process of hunting down the link of our conference proceedings, so I will drop that in the chat shortly.
Okay.
We can follow up with some of these resources in our follow-up email after the webinar as well. We'll have the recording available. So. Right. There's no other, I guess, remaining comments, contributions, ideas, questions. We have a couple minutes, but we can say goodbye and thank Elizabeth and Maria for sharing a really insightful, wonderful presentation. And thank everybody who joined us today for a very rich discussion. We really appreciate everything that everyone contributed today. It was really great to hear from everyone. And Dave, of course, as always, your knowledge is invaluable too, helping us keep on track and apply all this research that we're and everything we're learning. So thanks everyone for being here today. And hopefully we'll see you all at a webinar soon. And Will, were you going to add something before we wrap up?
Yeah. Sorry, just went late, but I wanted to add, since I literally just came from presenting some of our research to a group of STEM scholars at a bi-weekly meeting here at USF. They really appreciated coming back to them with some of our research findings from the interviews and focus groups that we did last year, and had some really great comments. I wanted to share one of them with the group, since I'll be sharing it with our team anyway. But one of them said that the bi-weekly meetings that USF holds, this was one of the bi-weekly meetings with STEM scholars, it not only helped build community and kind of shared experience, but it was also a valuable practice for professional networking. She specifically said that doing the networking amongst themselves helped her get used to a lot of the small talk and elevator pitches and those types of discussions that she has at professional networking events around the city. And I hadn't really heard that perspective before, and I, thought that was a really interesting touch. And so I just wanted to share that real quick because I was going to, debrief everybody about the talk anyway. So I was like, well, might as well give it to a bigger audience here.
That just got me super excited. Y'all know me and role theory and engineering identity and STEM identity. I'm like, that's literally performance at its core.
Exactly. And I said to them, like, yeah, that's something that you gotta remember. Like, you're developing your identity as an engineer. You're getting used to giving that talk. And I gave the example of, like, when I started going to conferences as a grad student, the people who I got to know, just casually having these casual conversations as grad students are the leaders in their respective fields now. And so these conversations that they're having amongst themselves, this is professional development.
Mm-hmm.
And professional networking.
Well, these are wonderful conversations, and I think we will continue on in this thread in future webinars and future discussions. I hope everyone here will join us as we continue this conversation. So please come back, follow us on our mailing list. We'll send out updates on the next webinar, and lots of good things to come. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Great job.